She was just a shy waitress who refused to steal from a customer. Her manager's hand gripped her arm, pulling her toward the back hallway where no cameras could see. What neither of them knew, a mafia boss was watching through the mirror. And he owned the restaurant. The chandeliers at La Doro cast golden light across table 12, where Senator Whitmore sat oblivious to the fact that his dinner bill had just been padded by $300. Mara Chen's hand trembled as she stared at the receipt Franklin had thrust into her palm. 22-year-old waitresses weren't supposed to notice these things. They were supposed to smile, process payments, and collect tips. But Mara had noticed everything since her first day 6 months ago. Every fake charge, every skimmed credit card, every time Franklin's greasy fingers had adjusted a number that didn't need adjusting. "Problem, sweetheart?" Franklin's voice dripped with mock concern as he leaned against the server station, his cologne so thick it made her eyes water. "The wine," Mara said quietly, her heart hammering against her ribs. He ordered the house Chianti. "This says Brunello di Montalcino." "So?" Franklin's smile didn't reach his eyes. "So that's a $280 difference." She kept her voice low, aware that the Friday night dinner rush swirled around them. The clink of silverware, the murmur of expensive conversations, the soft jazz that couldn't quite mask the tension building between them. Franklin's expression hardened. "You questioning my management, Mara?" She should have backed down. Every fiber of her shy, conflict-avoiding nature screamed to her to nod, process the bill, and let it go like she'd let everything else go. But something about Senator Whitmore's kind smile when he'd thanked her for the water refill made her stomach turn at the thought of stealing from him. "I'm questioning the bill," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but steady. "That's theft, sir." The word hung in the air between them like a grenade with its pin pulled. Franklin's face flushed deep red. Around them, the restaurant continued its elegant dance, servers gliding between tables, sommelier presenting a 1995 Bordeaux to a couple by the window, the gentle hum of wealth and discretion. No one seemed to notice that in the narrow galley between the kitchen and dining room, a young waitress had just committed career suicide. "You want to repeat that?" Franklin stepped closer, and Mara instinctively backed against the marble counter. "You want to call me a thief?" "In front of everyone." "I didn't." Mara started, but her words caught in her throat as Franklin's hand shot out and gripped her upper arm. "You're done for tonight," he hissed, his fingers digging into her skin through her crisp white sleeve. "Actually, you're probably done, period. Let's have a conversation in the back about your attitude problem." He began pulling her toward the hallway that led to the storage rooms and bathrooms, his grip iron-tight. Mara's mind raced. The back hallway had no cameras. She'd noticed that detail during her first week, filed it away with all the other observations she'd been collecting in her small notebook at home. "Please," she said, trying to plant her feet, but her black flats had no traction on the polished floor. "I'll process it. I'll do whatever you want." "Too late for that, sweetheart. You wanted to question management? Let me teach you about hierarchy." "Let her go." The voice came from behind them, quiet, measured, with an edge of steel that made Franklin freeze mid-stride. Mara looked up to see a man she'd never noticed before stepping out of the private mirrored suite near the bar. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair touched with silver at the temples and a face that could have been carved from stone. His charcoal suit probably cost more than her car, and he moved with the kind of predatory grace that made people instinctively step aside. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. "Mr. Moretti," Franklin stammered, his hand dropping from Mara's arm like she'd suddenly caught fire. I didn't realize you were here tonight. This is just a staff issue. Nothing that requires." I said let her go. Alessandro Moretti's dark eyes never left Franklin's face, but somehow Mara felt seen, really seen, for the first time all night. Franklin released her completely, stepping back with his hands raised in a gesture of surrender that would have been comical if Mara's heart wasn't racing so fast she thought she might pass out. Alessandro's gaze shifted to her briefly, just a flicker of eye contact that somehow conveyed both protection and assessment. You're finished for tonight, he said, his voice softer now but still carrying absolute authority. Go home. We'll handle this. Mara wanted to argue, to explain, to show him the receipt still clutched in her hand, but two men in dark suits had materialized from somewhere near the kitchen, guards she'd never noticed, which meant they were good at their job. Record everything, Alessandro said to them, his tone conversational, as if he were discussing the weather rather than dismantling a man's career. Review the security footage from the past 6 months. Every transaction Franklin processed, every bill he modified, every supplier payment he signed off on. I want documentation of all of it. Yes, sir, one of the guards said, already pulling out a phone. Franklin's face had gone from red to gray. Mr. Moretti, please, if we could just discuss this in private. There's nothing to discuss. Alessandro buttoned his suit jacket with careful precision. You made your choices, Franklin. Now you live with the consequences. Marcus, please escort Mr. Torres to the office and make sure he doesn't touch anything until we've completed our audit. As the guard moved toward Franklin, Alessandro turned back to Mara. Up close, she could see the thin scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the calculating intelligence in his eyes that made her feel like he'd already read her entire life story. You did the right thing, he said quietly, meant only for her ears. That took courage. Then he was gone, disappearing back through the mirrored door before Mara could find her voice to thank him, or ask him who he really was and why everyone in La Doro seemed terrified of him. She stood there for a moment, the receipt still crumpled in her fist, watching the restaurant return to normal around her as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. She could feel it in the weight of the other server's stares, in the nervous energy that now pulsed through the kitchen, in the way her hands had finally stopped shaking. As she gathered her things from her locker and headed for the back exit, Mara didn't notice the small security camera that had captured every word, every gesture, every moment of her quiet rebellion. In his office upstairs, Alessandro Moretti was already watching the footage again, his expression unreadable as he studied the young woman who'd risked everything for a principal. Find out everything about her, he told his consigliera Michael Santos, who stood beside him. Where she lives, where she's from, why she's working here. And check her background. I want to know if she's genuine or if someone planted her. Michael nodded, but he was smiling slightly. You think she's for real? Alessandro watched the screen as Mara quietly refused to process the fraudulent bill, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. I think, he said slowly, she might be exactly what we need. The surveillance room at La Doro smelled like expensive coffee and old leather. Alessandro sat in the dim blue glow of 12 monitors, watching Friday night's footage for the third time. It was 2:47 a.m., and he hadn't slept. You should go home, boss. Michael Santos stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, his usually immaculate appearance showing the wear of a 16-hour day. We can review this in the morning. No, Alessandro said quietly, his eyes never leaving the screen where Mara's small figure stood her ground against Franklin. We review it now. Michael sighed and pulled up a chair, setting down 2 fresh espressos. He'd been Alessandro's consigliera for 12 years, long enough to know when arguing was pointless. Start with the financial records, Alessandro instructed, rewinding the footage to the beginning of the shift. Show me everything Franklin touched tonight. Michael's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up a split screen. On one side, the security footage played. On the other, a cascade of transaction records populated the display. Table 12, Senator Whitmore, Michael narrated. Bill submitted at 9:47 p.m. Franklin modified it at 9:52 p.m. Added premium wine upgrade, truffle supplement to the pasta, and an extra dessert that was never ordered. He paused, his jaw tightening. Total overcharge, $340. Keep going. Table 6 earlier tonight. Congressman Bradley and his wife. $200 overcharge. Table 15, the Rothstein anniversary party. Michael let out a low whistle.
Jesus.
He hit them for almost $1,000. Added 2 bottles of Dom Perignon that never left the cellar. Alessandro's expression remained neutral, but his fingers drummed once against the armrest, a tell that Michael recognized as barely contained rage. "How long?" Alessandro asked. "Based on the pattern in our financial software?" Michael pulled up another screen. "At least 8 months. Maybe longer. He's been careful, rotating which tables he hits, never too obvious, always staying just under the threshold that would trigger an automatic audit. Except he got greedy tonight. Or desperate." Michael clicked to another window. "That's what I wanted to show you. Look at his phone records." The screen filled with a log of text messages and calls. Michael highlighted a number that appeared 17 times in the past month. "That number belongs to a burner phone, but I traced the cell tower pings. The phone's been used exclusively in a 3-block radius of the Meridian Tower downtown." Alessandro's eyes narrowed. "James Hartley's building." Bingo! Michael pulled up a series of intercepted text messages. "We couldn't crack the encryption until an hour ago, but once we did," he leaned back, letting Alessandro read. The messages painted a clear picture. James Hartley, real estate developer, rival investor, and the man who'd been trying to buy La Doro for 2 years, had been paying Franklin for inside information. Occupancy rates, profit margins, health inspection schedules, and most damaging, evidence of financial irregularities that Hartley could use to force a sale or hostile takeover. "Franklin's been feeding him doctored books," Michael explained, "making it look like we're running a massive skimming operation. Hartley's been building a case to present to the liquor board, probably planning to get our license suspended." Alessandro watched the footage again. Mara's small voice. "That's theft, sir." She'd stumbled into the middle of a corporate war without knowing it. And instead of looking the other way like every other employee had done for months, she'd stood up and said no. "The girl," Alessandro said. "What did you find?" Michael pulled up a new file. "Mara Chun, 22 years old. Parents died in a car accident when she was 19, drunk driver, not their fault. She dropped out of Columbia University, where she'd been studying accounting on a full scholarship. Needed to work full-time to pay off her younger brother's medical bills." "Brother?" "Tommy Chun, 17.
He was in the car, too."
"Traumatic brain injury. Spent 8 months in rehab. He's mostly recovered now, finishing high school, but the bills." Michael shook his head. "She's been working 3 jobs to cover what insurance wouldn't. La Doro is her night job. During the day, she does bookkeeping for a small grocery chain in Queens." Alessandro absorbed this information in silence. An accounting student who'd had to drop out. That explained why she'd noticed the discrepancies that everyone else had missed, or chosen to ignore. "There's more," Michael continued. "We pulled the footage from her locker. She doesn't know about the camera we installed there last month during the security upgrade." He played a new clip. It showed Mara during her break 3 weeks ago, pulling out a small notebook and writing in it with quick, precise strokes. Michael zoomed in on the page. It was a ledger. A meticulous record of every fraudulent charge she'd witnessed, complete with dates, table numbers, amounts, and descriptions. At the top of the page, she'd written, "In case someone needs this someday." "She's been documenting everything," Michael said quietly. "Every instance of Franklin's fraud, every time he yelled at a server for refusing to go along with it, every harassment complaint that went ignored. It's all there. 3 months of evidence." Alessandro stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the dark Chicago street below. La Doro's neon sign reflected in the rain-slicked pavement, casting everything in shades of gold and shadow. "She could have gone to the authorities," he said. "She's scared," Michael replied. "Look at her employment history. Before this, she worked at 2 other restaurants. Both times, she quit after less than 2 months. My guess? She saw similar problems, spoke up, and got fired for it. Now she's got her brother depending on her. She can't afford to lose another job. So she stayed quiet and kept records." Alessandro turned back to the screens, hoping someone with power would eventually notice. Smart girl. Smart, principled, and observant, Alessandro returned to his chair, steepling his fingers as he studied Mara's image frozen on the screen. Qualities in short supply. Michael waited, knowing his boss was working through a plan. Don't fire Franklin, Alessandro finally said. What? Not yet. If we fire him now, Hartley will know we're onto him. He'll destroy evidence, disappear, and come at us from another angle. Alessandro's smile was cold and precise. But if Franklin thinks he's safe, thinks he intimidated the girl into silence, he'll keep communicating with Hartley. He'll get bolder. You want to use him as bait. I want to use him as a weapon. Alessandro pulled up Franklin's personnel file. Call him tomorrow. Tell him there was a misunderstanding, that the girl has been dismissed for insubordination, and that we value his loyalty. Make him believe he won. And then we watch him. We record everything. And when Hartley makes his move, we'll have everything we need to bury him, and every corrupt official he's paid off. Alessandro closed the file with a decisive click. But first, I need to talk to the girl. Michael raised an eyebrow. You're bringing her into this.
She's already in this.
She just doesn't know how deep. Alessandro stood, buttoning his jacket. Tomorrow afternoon. Bring her to the office under the pretense of final paperwork. I want to see if she's as brave in daylight as she was tonight. And if she's not. Alessandro paused at the door, looking back at the frozen image of Mara standing up to Franklin, her spine straight despite her fear. Then we'll protect her anyway, he said. She earned that much. Mara's alarm went off at 6:30 a.m., and for a moment, she forgot why her entire body ached with tension. Then the memories flooded back. Franklin's grip on her arm, the stranger's cold voice cutting through the chaos, those dark eyes that had seen right through her. She sat up in the tiny studio apartment in Queens, careful not to wake Tommy, who was asleep on the pull-out couch across the room. Her 17-year-old brother had kicked off his blankets again, his hair sticking up at odd angles. The scar above his left temple, barely visible now, but Mara could never stop seeing it, caught the morning light filtering through their thin curtains. Medical bills from his accident were stacked neatly on the kitchen counter. $47,000 remaining. At her current rate, working 3 jobs, she'd have it paid off in 2 years. Maybe 3. If she still had those jobs. Mara pulled her laptop onto her knees and opened a blank document. Her hands hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before she started typing. Dear Management, I am writing to formally resign from my position as waitress at L'Adoro, effective immediately. She stopped, deleted it, started again. To whom it may concern, due to unforeseen circumstances.
Delete.
The truth was, she didn't know what to write. She didn't know if she'd been fired last night or saved. She didn't know who Alessandro Moretti was, beyond the obvious, someone important enough to make Franklin turn gray with fear. She didn't know if coming back would mean walking into an ambush, or if staying away would mean losing the best-paying job she'd ever had. What she did know was that she'd crossed a line. You didn't question management and survive. Not in her experience. Mara closed the laptop and pulled open her nightstand drawer. Beneath a stack of bills and a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice that had been her mother's, she found the notebook. It was nothing special, a cheap composition book with a black and white marbled cover, the kind you could buy at any drugstore for $2. But inside its pages was 3 months of careful documentation. Evidence. Insurance, maybe, or just a way to convince herself she wasn't going crazy. She flipped to the first entry, dated 3 months ago. June 15th, Table 8. Franklin added $150 premium cocktail upgrade to couple's bill. They only ordered house wine. Manager Jake saw it, said nothing. June 18th, server Maria questioned Franklin about fake delivery charge. He screamed at her in front of everyone, called her stupid. She cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes. HR did nothing. June 22nd, Franklin grabbed my wrist when I was too slow bringing his coffee. Left bruises. Didn't report it. Need this job. Page after page of the same pattern. Theft, harassment, intimidation. And through it all, the quiet complicity of everyone around her. Servers who looked the other way, managers who pretended not to notice, customers who never checked their bills carefully enough to spot the fraud. Mara had told herself she was documenting it for someone else, some future investigator or whistleblower who might have the courage she lacked. But sitting here in the gray morning light, she realized she'd been documenting it for herself. Proof that she wasn't imagining things. Proof that she wasn't the problem. "You're up early." Tommy's voice made her jump. He was sitting up on the couch, squinting at her without his glasses. "Couldn't sleep," Mara said, closing the notebook quickly. "You okay?" "You look—" Tommy fumbled for his glasses on the side table, put them on, and studied her more carefully. "You look like you've been crying." "I'm fine." She wasn't fine. She'd cried herself to sleep at 3 a.m., terrified that she'd just destroyed their financial stability over a stupid principle. Just tired. Tommy knew her too well. What happened? Mara considered lying, but she'd never been good at it. "I think I got fired last night."
What? Why?
"I stopped a theft." She tried to smile. "Turns out that's frowned upon in the restaurant business." Tommy was fully awake now, anger flashing across his face, the same protective streak their father had. "That's illegal. You could sue them." "We could." "We could do nothing," Mara interrupted gently. "We can't afford a lawyer, Tommy. We can barely afford rent. This is because of me." His voice went quiet, guilty. "The bills. If I hadn't—" "Don't." Mara moved to sit beside him on the couch, pulling him into a hug like she used to when he was little and had nightmares. "None of this is your fault. Not the accident, not the bills, nothing." They sat like that for a moment, the morning sun slowly filling their small apartment with light. Outside, the city was waking up, car horns, distant sirens, the rumble of the subway beneath their building. "So what now?" Tommy asked. Mara thought about the notebook in her drawer, about Alessandro Moretti's unreadable expression, about the way his guards had appeared like shadows and Franklin had crumbled like wet paper. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm supposed to hear from them today about final paperwork. Maybe it won't be as bad as I think." Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. Her heart rate kicked up as she reached for it. The text was brief. "Ms. Chun, please come to La Doro today at 2 p.m. for exit interview and final payment. Ask for Michael Santos. Management." "Well," Mara said, showing Tommy the screen. "Looks like I have my answer. Exit interview. Final payment." The professional language of being fired. Tommy read the message and scowled. "You want me to come with you? To my own firing? That'll make it less humiliating," but Mara was smiling despite herself. "No, I'll be fine. You have school." After Tommy left for his morning classes, Mara stood in the shower and let the water run cold, trying to shock herself into numbness. She'd been fired before. She'd survived this too. She'd find another job, pick up extra shifts at the bookkeeping firm, maybe sell some of her mother's jewelry that she'd been avoiding touching. She got dressed in simple black pants and a white blouse, professional, forgettable. As she was leaving, she grabbed the notebook from her drawer. If they were going to fire her anyway, maybe it was time someone in power saw what had been happening. Maybe that Alessandro Moretti, whoever he was, would actually care. Or maybe she was about to make everything so much worse. Outside her building, Mara didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street, or the man in the driver's seat who'd been watching her apartment since 5 a.m. She didn't see him make a phone call as she headed for the subway. "She's on the move," the man said quietly. "And boss? She's carrying the notebook." On the other end of the line, in his office at La Doro, Alessandro Moretti smiled. "Good," he said. "Let her come." La Doro looked different in daylight. Without the golden glow of evening chandeliers and the buzz of dinner conversation, it felt like a stage between performances, beautiful but hollow. Mara stood in the empty dining room at exactly 2 p.m., clutching her purse where she'd hidden the notebook, and wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. "Miss Chun." She turned to find a man in his 40s approaching, handsome in a sharp-edged way, with graying temples and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit and moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where the bodies were buried. "I'm Michael Santos, Mr. Moretti's consigliere." He extended his hand. "Thank you for coming." I didn't think I had a choice, Mara said, shaking his hand. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Michael's smile was almost sympathetic. There's always a choice, Miss Chen. This way, please. He led her past the empty tables, through a door marked private, and up a staircase she'd never known existed. The walls were lined with black and white photographs of Chicago from the 1920s, speakeasies, jazz clubs, men in fedoras conducting business in shadowy corners. How long have you worked at La Doro? Michael asked as they climbed. 6 months. And in that time, did you notice anything unusual about the operation? Mara's hand tightened on her purse strap. This was it, the part where they asked her to sign an NDA, threatened her with legal action if she spoke about what she'd seen, maybe offered her a small payout to disappear quietly. I noticed a lot of things, she said carefully. I'm sure you did. They reached a heavy wooden door at the top of the stairs. Michael knocked twice, then opened it without waiting for response. The office was nothing like Mara expected. She'd imagined something cold and corporate, glass and steel, intimidating. Instead, she walked into a space that felt like a private library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes. A Persian rug covered dark hardwood floors. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows that overlooked the Chicago River. And behind an antique mahogany desk sat Alessandro Moretti. He looked different in daylight, too, less like a shadowy protector and more like what he actually was: dangerous. He wore a black shirt with no tie, sleeves rolled to his forearms, and when he stood to greet her, Mara noticed the way he moved, controlled, economical, like a predator conserving energy. Miss Chen, he said, his voice the same quiet steel she remembered from last night. Please sit down. Mara sat in one of the leather chairs across from his desk, acutely aware of Michael taking a position by the window, close enough to intervene, far enough to seem unintrusive. Coffee? Alessandro asked, already pouring from a French press on a side table. I'm told you take it black. How do you? Mara stopped herself. Of course he knew. He probably knew everything about her by now.
Yes.
Thank you. He handed her a delicate porcelain cup that probably cost more than her monthly rent, then sat down across from her, his own coffee untouched. I want to start by thanking you, he said. Mara blinked. For what? For last night. For standing up to Franklin when no one else would. His dark eyes held hers. That took courage. It took stupidity, Mara corrected, her throat tight. I need this job, Mr. Moretti. I can't afford to. You're not fired. The words hung in the air. Mara stared at him, certain she'd misheard. I'm not.
No.
In fact, I ask you here because I need your help. Alessandro leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. But first, I need to know if I can trust you. So I'm going to tell you something that very few people know, and you're going to decide whether you want to walk away or step into something much bigger than a waitressing job. Mara's heart hammered. I don't understand. I own La Doro, Alessandro said simply. Not publicly. There are layers of holding companies and legal structures for reasons we don't need to discuss. But this restaurant, every brick and board of it, belongs to me. And Franklin Torres was my general manager. Past tense, Alessandro's expression hardened slightly. What he was doing, the bill padding, the fraud, wasn't just theft from customers. It was part of a larger operation designed to make my business look corrupt, to create evidence that could be used to force a sale. He slid a folder across the desk. Mara opened it with trembling hands to find printouts of text messages, financial records, photographs of Franklin meeting with a silver-haired man outside a downtown office building.
James Artley, Alessandro explained.
Real estate developer. He's been trying to buy La Doro for 2 years. When I refused to sell, he decided to take it by force. Franklin was his inside man. Mara's accounting training kicked in automatically as she scanned the documents. The pattern was clear: systematic fraud designed to create a paper trail of corruption. You could go to the police, she said. I could. But Hartley has connections. Judges, city council members, people who owe him favors. Alessandro's smile was cold. Taking him down requires more than just evidence. It requires strategy. He pulled out another folder, and Mara's breath caught as she recognized her own handwriting. Her notebook, or rather, photocopies of every page. "You've been documenting everything," Alessandro said quietly. "Every instance of fraud, every harassment complaint, every time Franklin crossed a line. You saw the rod in this place, and instead of running, you kept a record." He leaned forward, his gaze intense.
Why?
Mara's hands shook around the coffee cup. "I thought
Someone might need it someday.
someone who could actually do something about it." "You were right." Alessandro closed the folder gently. "Ms. Chen, Mara, I need to identify which staff members are honest and which are part of Hartley's network. I need someone who's been paying attention, who knows who looked away and who participated. Someone the other servers trust." "You want me to spy for you?" "I want you to help me clean house," he corrected. "To rebuild La Doro into what it should be, a place where people like you don't have to choose between their integrity and their paycheck." Mara stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Below, the city sprawled in every direction, millions of people fighting their own battles, making their own impossible choices. "I have a brother," she said quietly. "He depends on me. If I do this and it goes wrong—" "If you do this, you'll have my protection," Alessandro interrupted. "And if you choose to walk away right now, you'll still have my protection. What Franklin did to you last night was unacceptable. That doesn't happen to people under my roof." Mara turned to face him. "And what happens to Franklin? That depends on how deep Hartley's network goes." But eventually, Alessandro's expression was unreadable. He'll face consequences for his choices. The way he said it made Mara shiver. This man wasn't just a restaurant owner. The way Michael stood guard, the way Franklin had turned gray at his voice, the careful way he talked about consequences. Alessandro Moretti was something else entirely. Something dangerous. "If I help you," Mara said slowly, "I need to know what I'm getting into. Who are you really?" Alessandro stood, walking to the bookshelves where a framed photograph showed a younger version of him with an older man who had the same intense eyes. "I'm someone who values loyalty," he said finally, "and punishes betrayal. I'm someone who built something from nothing and refuses to let corrupt men take it apart." He turned back to her. "And right now, I'm someone who's giving you a choice. Help me save this place, or walk away with 3 months severance and a strong recommendation for your next job." Mara thought about Tommy, about the bills, about every other time she'd stayed silent and hated herself for it. "If I do this," she said, "I want a guarantee. My brother stays protected, no matter what happens to me." Alessandro nodded once. "Done. And I want to see Franklin face real consequences. Not just fired. Actual justice." "That," Alessandro said with a slight smile, "I can promise you'll enjoy watching." Mara took a deep breath and extended her hand. "Then I'm in." Alessandro's office transformed into a war room within minutes. Michael spread blueprints across the desk, while another man Mara didn't recognize set up a laptop displaying live feeds from cameras throughout the restaurant. "This is Victor," Alessandro said, gesturing to the newcomer, a wiry man in his 30s with the look of someone who could disappear into a crowd in seconds. "Best surveillance tech in Chicago." Victor nodded at Mara, without smiling.
Mom.
"Mara's going to help us identify the players," Alessandro continued, pulling up staff photographs on a tablet. "Start with the servers. Who knew what Franklin was doing?" Mara studied the faces, her stomach churning. These were her coworkers, people she'd shared breaks with, complained about difficult customers with, occasionally laughed with during the chaos of Saturday night rushes. "Marcus," she said, pointing to a photo. "The bartender. He definitely knew. I saw him and Franklin splitting cash from the register after closing once. They didn't know I was still in the stockroom." Michael made a note. "Who else?" "Jake, the floor manager. He saw Franklin alter bills multiple times and never said anything. But I don't think he was getting paid off. I think he was just she struggled for the word." "A coward," Alessandro supplied, not unkindly. Yeah, Mara pointed to another photo. But Sarah, Lisa, and David, the other waiters, they're clean. They question things sometimes but got shut down fast. They have families, bills. They couldn't afford to lose their jobs. Like you, Michael observed. Like me. For the next 20 minutes, Mara walked them through the entire staff structure, identifying who was complicit, who was intimidated into silence, and who was genuinely unaware. With each name, she felt like she was betraying confidences, but Alessandro's earlier words echoed in her mind. Help me rebuild this into what it should be. Good, Alessandro said when she finished. Now comes the interesting part. Victor, show her the setup. Victor pulled up a new screen showing Franklin's phone records. We've been monitoring his communications since last night. He received a call from Hartley's people an hour ago. He played an audio file. Mara recognized Franklin's voice immediately, though it sounded strained, nervous. Telling you Moretti knows something. He had me in the office for 20 minutes asking about procedures, double-checking everything. I think the girl talked. Calm down, the second voice was smooth, educated, cold. Did he fire you? No, that's what's weird. He apologized for the misunderstanding, said the waitress was just confused, gave me a bonus for my trouble. Then he doesn't know anything. He's testing loyalty. This is actually perfect timing. Perfect? How is any of this? Because we're ready to move. We have enough evidence of financial irregularities to take to the liquor board next week. But we need one more piece, proof of organized crime connections. Get us footage from Moretti's private meetings. His security feeds, client lists, anything that shows he's running more than just a restaurant. A long pause. Then Franklin. That's not what we agreed. You said I'd just provide financial data. And we're paying you $50,000 for your trouble. That's considerably more than we agreed, Mr. Torres. Think of it as hazard pay. Mara watched Alessandro's face as the recording played. He showed no emotion, but his fingers drummed once against the desk. That same tell Michael had noticed the night before. He took the deal, Victor said, fast-forwarding through Franklin's eventual agreement. They're meeting Thursday night at Hartley's office in the Meridian Tower. Franklin's supposed to bring the data on a secure drive. Thursday, Alessandro repeated, glancing at Michael. That gives us 4 days. 4 days to do what? Mara asked. To give Franklin exactly what he's asking for, Alessandro's smile was sharp and calculated. Victor, I want you to create a dummy drive. Fill it with files that look like legitimate business records, but are actually completely legal transactions. Restaurant suppliers, staff payroll, tax documents. Boring, clean, useless. He's expecting criminal evidence, Michael said, catching on. When he delivers clean records, Hartley will know something's wrong.
Exactly.
He'll push Franklin for more, maybe even threaten him. Franklin will panic. Alessandro turned to Victor. Can you set up surveillance in Hartley's office? Already done. Planted microcameras during their cleaning service shift last month. Just needed a reason to activate them. Victor pulled up a new screen showing multiple angles of a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. Audio and visual, completely undetectable. Mara's head spun. You've been planning this for a month? I've been planning this since Hartley first tried to buy La Doro 2 years ago, Alessandro corrected. Last night just accelerated the timeline. He looked at her directly. Which is why I need you to do something that might feel wrong. What? Tomorrow, I need you to go back to work like nothing happened. Franklin's been told you were fired, but you're going to show up for your shift. When he questions it, you'll tell him I personally reinstated you, that I said it was all a misunderstanding. You want me to face him, Mara said slowly, after what he did. I want you to make him nervous, Alessandro replied. Franklin thinks he won last night. Seeing you back at work, protected by me, will make him paranoid. Paranoid people make mistakes. Michael leaned against the desk. You'll have protection. Victor will be monitoring everything through the security feeds, and we'll have 2 men in the dining room posing as customers. If Franklin even looks at you wrong. I can handle Franklin, Mara interrupted, surprising herself. The fear from last night was still there, but underneath it was something harder, angrier. What happens after Thursday? After you record the meeting? Then we decide how to use it, Alessandro said. Hartley has connections, but connections can be severed when those people see what he's really been doing. We'll leak the footage to the right journalists, the right prosecutors. By the time we're done, Hartley won't be able to buy a food truck, much less a restaurant. And Franklin? The room went quiet. Alessandro exchanged a look with Michael that Mara couldn't quite read. Franklin made his choices, Alessandro said finally. He chose money over integrity, chose to hurt people weaker than himself, chose to betray trust. Those choices have consequences. There was something in his tone that made Mara remember her earlier observation. This man was more than a restaurant owner. Much more. I need to ask you something, she said, her voice quiet but steady. And I need an honest answer.
Alessandro nodded.
Who are you really? Not the restaurant owner's story. The truth. Alessandro was silent for a long moment, studying her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Then he stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. My family has been in Chicago for 4 generations, he said. We built businesses, protected our people, and operated in the shadows when necessary. La Doro is legitimate, completely clean, every permit in order, every tax paid. But yes, Mara, I have other interests, other obligations. The Mafia, she said. Not a question. That's a word that carries a lot of assumptions, Alessandro replied, turning back to her. I prefer to think of it as family business. But if you need to use that word to decide whether you can trust me, then yes. My family has traditional connections. Mara should have been terrified. Should have run. Instead, she thought about Franklin's hand on her arm, about every time she'd been powerless, about Tommy's medical bills and her mother's jewelry and the scholarship she'd lost. And Hartley doesn't know this about you, she said. Hartley knows I'm connected. He doesn't know how deeply or how far my reach extends. Alessandro's smile was cold. That's his fatal miscalculation. Victor cleared his throat. Boss, we need to move on the surveillance setup. If we're going to have everything in place by Thursday. Do it, Alessandro said. Then tomorrow. You should go home.
Get some rest.
Tomorrow will be difficult. Mara stood, but paused at the door. Mr. Moretti? Alessandro, he corrected gently.
Alessandro.
Thank you. For last night. For this. She gestured at the war room around them. For giving me a chance to fight back. Thank you for being brave enough to take it, he replied. As Michael walked her back downstairs, Mara felt the weight of what she'd agreed to settling on her shoulders. She was now part of something dangerous, something that could destroy her if it went wrong. But for the first time in 3 years, since the night her parents died and her world collapsed, she felt like she had some control over her own fate. And that was worth the risk. Mara's hands shook as she tied her apron strings in the staff locker room. It was 5:47 p.m. on Wednesday, her first shift back since Friday night. The other servers gave her strange looks, a mixture of sympathy and confusion. I thought you were fired, Sarah whispered, catching Mara by the sink. Sarah was 43, a single mother of 2, with worry lines etched deep around her eyes. So did I, Mara admitted. Franklin's been telling everyone you quit. Said you couldn't handle the pressure. Sarah glanced toward the kitchen where voices rose and fell in pre-shift chaos. He doesn't know you're here yet.
Perfect.
That was exactly what Alessandro wanted. The element of surprise, the moment of panic when Franklin realized his lie had been exposed. Sarah, Mara said quietly, touching her co-worker's arm. Whatever happens tonight, stay out of it. Keep your head down, do your job, go home to your kids. Sarah's eyes widened. Mara, what's going on? Just trust me. Please. Before Sarah could respond, the kitchen doors swung open and Franklin emerged, clipboard in hand, his voice carrying across the locker room as he barked instructions about table assignments. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, his shirt not quite as crisp as usual.
Good.
He should be worried. Then he saw her. Franklin stopped mid-sentence, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might have been fear. The clipboard slipped slightly in his hands. "What are you doing here?" His voice came out higher than intended. Mara straightened her shoulders, channeling every ounce of courage Alessandro's protection had given her. "Working my shift, sir. Mr. Moretti personally reinstated me yesterday. Didn't he tell you?" The other servers had gone silent, watching the confrontation with wide eyes. Franklin's jaw clenched so hard Mara could see the muscle jumping. "Mr. Moretti and I need to have a conversation," he said tightly. "You, back to work. Station 4-inch." He disappeared into his office, and Mara caught Sarah's questioning look. She just shook her head and headed to the dining room, where Victor's voice crackled softly in the nearly invisible earpiece Alessandro had given her that morning.
Good job.
"He's making a call now. We're recording everything." Mara adjusted her earpiece, disguised as a small hearing aid, and began setting up her tables. The restaurant would open in 10 minutes. She needed to look normal, act normal, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Two men sat at the bar, both in business suits, both looking at their phones with the practiced disinterest of customers waiting for tables. Mara recognized them from the photographs in Alessandro's office, his men, here to protect her. One was Marcus's replacement, a younger bartender named Tony, who'd started just this morning. The other posed as a customer, nursing a whiskey and reading the Tribune. Franklin emerged from his office 15 minutes later, his expression carefully neutral, but his movements jerky, agitated. He avoided looking at Mara for the entire pre-shift meeting, instead focusing on Marcus the bartender, who seemed equally nervous. "Changes to closing procedures," Franklin announced, his voice too loud in the small staff area. "Marcus, I need you to stay late tonight. Inventory recount." Marcus nodded, but his eyes flicked to Mara for just a second. She'd been right about him, he was part of this. The dinner shift began like any other. Mara took orders, delivered food, smiled at customers, and pretended her entire world wasn't balanced on a knife's edge. But she watched. She noticed how Franklin kept checking his phone, how he pulled Marcus aside twice for whispered conversations, how his eyes darted to the security cameras as if seeing them for the first time. Around 8 p.m., Alessandro arrived. He didn't announce himself, just appeared at table 12, the same table where Senator Whitmore had sat Friday night, the same table where this had all started. He was alone, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Mara's car, and when he caught her eye, he gave the smallest nod. Franklin nearly dropped his clipboard when he spotted him. "Mr. Moretti," he stammered, rushing over. "We didn't have you on the reservation list. I would have prepared." "I don't need preparation, Franklin. Just a table and good service." Alessandro's voice was mild, pleasant even, but there was steel underneath. "I believe Ms. Chun is working station 4. "Yes, but I can have someone else." "No need. She'll be fine." Mara approached with a water glass, her hands steady despite the tension crackling through the air. "Good evening, Mr. Moretti. Can I start you with something from the bar?" McAllen, 25, neat, he looked up at her and she saw approval in his dark eyes. "And the sea base, however the chef recommends." "Of course." As she walked away, Victor's voice whispered in her ear. Franklin just texted Hartley. "Moretti here. Watching everything." "This feels wrong," Hartley's response. "Stick to the plan." Thursday night. Don't panic. Mara delivered Alessandro's whiskey, her movements automatic while her mind raced. Thursday night, tomorrow. Less than 24 hours until Franklin was supposed to deliver the fake data to Hartley's office, until Alessandro's trap would spring shut. The rest of the shift passed in surreal normalcy. Mara served customers, Franklin barked orders. The kitchen maintained its controlled chaos. But underneath, everyone who knew could feel it, the gathering storm, the sense that something was about to break. At 10:30 p.m., Alessandro paid his bill and left a $100 tip on a $60 meal. As Mara cleared his table, she found a note under the napkin. "Well done. Tomorrow, everything changes." Franklin left early, claiming a headache. Marcus stayed for the inventory count that was clearly a cover for something else, probably coordinating with Hartley's people, Mara guessed. She clocked out at 11 p.m., exhausted and wired with adrenaline. Michael was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against a black Mercedes.
Get in, he said.
Alessandro wants a final briefing before tomorrow. They drove through Chicago's late-night streets, past the glowing windows of buildings that never slept. Mara watched the city blur past and thought about how different everything looked when you knew its secrets. Alessandro's office was lit by a single desk lamp when they arrived. He sat in shadow, studying multiple computer screens showing various angles of Hartley's office in the Meridian Tower. Victor finished the setup this afternoon, he said without preamble. When Franklin delivers the drive tomorrow night, we'll have 8 different camera angles, full audio, and a duplicate recording saved to 3 separate secure servers. And the tip to the journalists? Michael asked. Goes out at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Alessandro pulled up a draft email on his screen. Anonymous source, sent through encrypted channels to 3 different reporters, one at the Tribune, one at Channel 7, one at a financial blog that's been investigating Hartley for months. The subject line, restaurant industry bribery scheme. Evidence dropped tonight. They'll be watching when Franklin makes the delivery, Mara realized. Not just watching. One of them will coincidentally be in the building, camera ready. Alessandro's smile was cold. By the time Franklin walks out of that meeting, his face will be on every news site in Chicago.
He'll panic, Michael said.
He'll run straight to us, begging for protection. Alessandro stood, pacing to the window. And we'll have every word, every admission, every piece of evidence we need to destroy Hartley's entire operation. Mara thought about Franklin's grip on her arm, his threats, his months of theft and abuse. What happens to him after? After he gives you everything? Alessandro turned, his expression unreadable in the dim light. What do you think should happen? It was a test, Mara realized. He was asking what kind of justice she wanted, legal or otherwise. I think, she said slowly, he should face real consequences. Prison if possible. Public humiliation, definitely. But most of all, I think everyone should know what he did. The servers he bullied, the customers he stole from, everyone who suffered because of his greed, they should know justice was served. Alessandro nodded, something like respect flickering in his eyes. Then, that's what you'll get. Michael, tomorrow morning. Already drafted, Michael interrupted, pulling up documents on his tablet. The moment we have Franklin's confession on tape, these go to the state's attorney's office, the IRS, and the FBI's white-collar crime division. Between the fraud, the conspiracy, and the racketeering charges Hartley's facing, Franklin's looking at 10 to 15 years minimum. Good. Alessandro checked his watch. It's late. Mara, go home. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. As Michael drove her back to Queens, Mara stared out at the city lights and wondered if she'd be able to sleep at all. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Franklin and Hartley would fall. Tomorrow, she'd finally understand what it felt like to fight back and win. Thursday morning broke gray and cold over Chicago, the kind of October day that promised rain. At 6:02 a.m., 3 journalists in different parts of the city received the same encrypted email. The subject line read, Restaurant Industry Bribery Scheme. Evidence dropped tonight. Rachel Kim, investigative reporter for the Chicago Tribune, was on her second coffee when the email arrived. She'd been following James Hartley's business dealings for 8 months, ever since a tip suggested he was using intimidation and bribery to acquire properties in the downtown corridor. She'd never been able to prove it. Until now. The email was brief. Meridian Tower, 47th floor, Hartley Development Offices. 8 p.m. tonight. Bring a camera. You'll want to document this. Attached were 3 files, financial records showing systematic fraud at La Doro, text message logs between Franklin Torres and an unnamed contact, and a photograph of Franklin entering the Meridian Tower dated 2 weeks ago. Rachel forwarded the email to her editor with a single line. This is it. The Hartley story. I need a camera crew tonight. Across town, In Alessandro's surveillance office, Victor monitored the journalists' responses in real time. All three took the bait, he reported, watching as separate email threads lit up with urgent messages. Tribune's sending their best investigative team. Channel 7 is mobilizing a camera crew. The financial blog guy is already on his way to scout the location. Alessandro sat perfectly still in his chair, a chess player watching his pieces move into position. And Franklin left his apartment 20 minutes ago. He's been driving in circles, classic counter-surveillance behavior, except he's terrible at it. Victor pulled up GPS tracking from Franklin's phone. He's scared. Good. Fear makes people sloppy. Alessandro checked his watch. 6:47 a.m. Michael. Status on the office setup. Michael looked up from his laptop. Victor's cameras are active and recording. We've also got 2 men in the building, one working as security on the 47th floor, another as maintenance. If Franklin tries anything unexpected, they'll intervene. He won't. Alessandro stood, buttoning his suit jacket. Franklin's too predictable. He'll follow Hartley's instructions exactly, collect his payment, and think he's won. Until he walks outside and finds 3 news crews waiting, Michael said with a slight smile. Victor zoomed in on another monitor showing the Meridian Tower's main entrance. Speaking of which, the Tribune crew just arrived. They're setting up across the street with a telephoto lens. The trap was set. Now, they just had to wait for Franklin to walk into it. At 2 p.m., Franklin sat in his car outside a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, the secure drive burning a hole in his jacket pocket. His hands shook as he checked his phone for the 15th time. The text from Hartley's assistant had arrived an hour ago, 8 p.m. tonight. 47th floor. Come alone. Bring the data. Franklin had the data, or what he thought was the data. He'd spent all last night accessing Alessandro's private server using credentials he'd stolen months ago, downloading files that looked legitimate, client lists, supplier contracts, financial transactions. The kind of material that could be twisted to suggest money laundering or organized crime connections. What Franklin didn't know was that Alessandro had anticipated this months ago. Every file Franklin had stolen was carefully curated, real enough to seem authentic, clean enough to be completely legal, useless enough to make Hartley furious when he realized he'd paid $50,000 for nothing. Franklin's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Boss been asking questions about you. Feels wrong. Maybe we should abort. Franklin typed back quickly. Too late. Already committed. After tonight we're golden. He deleted the message thread and pocketed his phone. Across the street, in an unmarked sedan, one of Alessandro's men photographed the entire exchange. By 6 p.m., the energy in Alessandro's office had shifted from planning to execution. Multiple screens showed different angles. The Meridian Tower lobby, the 47th floor hallway, Hartley's corner office, and various street views where journalists were positioning themselves. Mara sat in the corner, watching it all unfold. Alessandro had insisted she be present for this. You earned the right to see this through, he'd said. The Tribune crew is in position, Victor narrated like a sports commentator. Channel 7 just arrived. They're setting up on the east side. The blogger. Oh, he's ballsy. He's actually in the building pretending to be a delivery guy. Will they recognize Franklin? Mara asked. They have his photo, Michael replied. And we made sure his route from the parking garage takes him right past the lobby cameras. They'll get him coming and going. Alessandro stood by the window, his back to the room, watching the city darken as evening approached. Victor, final audio check on Hartley's office. Victor toggled through channels. Crystal clear sound filled the room. Hartley's voice speaking to someone on the phone, every word captured perfectly. Don't care what it costs. I want Law Doro, and this is how we get it. Once we have proof Moretti's running illegal operations out of that restaurant, the liquor board will have no choice but to suspend his license. Then we move in with a cash offer while he's desperate. The person on the other end said something inaudible. Yes, I'm aware of his connections, Hartley snapped. That's exactly why we need ironclad evidence. Franklin's delivery tonight gives us everything we need. Alessandro turned from the window, his expression cold satisfaction. Record that. I want it in the package we send to the state's attorney. Already done, Victor confirmed. The minutes crawled past. 7:15 p.m. 7:30 p.m. 7:45 p.m. At 7:52 p.m., Franklin's car pulled into the Meridian Tower parking garage. Here we go, Michael murmured. They watched on the monitors as Franklin emerged from his car, looking around nervously. He straightened his tie, checked his pocket for the drive, and headed for the elevators. The lobby cameras caught him perfectly, his face clearly visible, his body language screaming guilt and anxiety. Outside, Rachel Kim focused her telephoto lens and started shooting. Franklin rode the elevator to the 47th floor, unaware that 3 cameras captured his ascent. He stepped out into the hallway, newly waxed floors, expensive art on the walls, the kind of corporate luxury that whispered of power and money. He knocked on Hartley's office door at exactly 8 p.m. In Alessandra's office, everyone held their breath. The door opened, and James Hartley himself stood there, 62 years old, silver hair, expensive suit, and the smile of a man who thought he'd already won. Mr. Torres, Hartley said, his voice warm but his eyes calculating. Right on time. Please come in. Franklin stepped inside, and the door closed behind him. Victor switched to the internal office cameras. 8 different angles showed Franklin and Hartley facing each other, the city lights of Chicago spreading out behind them through floor-to-ceiling windows. I have what you asked for, Franklin said, pulling out the drive with trembling hands. Everything from Moretti's private server. Client lists, financial records, supplier payments. There's at least a dozen transactions that look questionable. Hartley took the drive, turning it over in his hands like it was a precious gem. You're certain he doesn't know you accessed these files? Positive. I cover my tracks, Franklin licked his lips. About the payment. Of course, Hartley moved to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick envelope. 50,000 as agreed. Cash, untraceable. Franklin's hands shook as he took the envelope. This was it. Enough money to disappear, to start over somewhere Hartley and Moretti, and all of this couldn't touch him. What he didn't see was Hartley's slight frown as he inserted the drive into his computer and began scrolling through files. What he didn't hear was Hartley's assistant in the outer office, speaking quietly into a phone. Yes, Mr. Hartley. I've confirmed. Those journalists are definitely here. All 3 sources we were worried about. In Alessandro's office, Michael leaned forward. Wait. Hartley knows about the journalists. Of course he does, Alessandro said calmly. He has his own intelligence network. But he thinks they're here investigating him, which they are. What he doesn't know is that we orchestrated it. On screen, Hartley's expression was darkening as he reviewed the files. Hartley looked up at Franklin. This is all legitimate business. Legal contracts, normal supplier relationships, standard client records. There's nothing here I can use. Franklin's face went pale. That's impossible. I pulled everything from his private server. Then either you pulled the wrong files or Moretti's smarter than we thought. Hartley stood abruptly. I paid you $50,000 for evidence, Mr. Torres. Not a collection of restaurant invoices and payroll records. I can get more, Franklin said desperately. Give me another week. We don't have another week. The liquor board review is Monday. Hartley moved to the window, staring out at the city. This was supposed to be the final piece. Without it, everything falls apart. Outside the Meridian Tower, Rachel Kim adjusted her camera lens and smiled. She'd just captured Franklin Torres entering the building with a secure drive, and she'd just intercepted an interesting radio transmission from Hartley's security team mentioning the delivery. Everything was falling into place. And Franklin Torres had no idea his entire world was about to collapse. Franklin stumbled out of the Meridian Tower at 8:47 p.m., $50,000 lighter, and his confidence shattered. Hartley's final words echoed in his ears. Don't contact me again until you have something actually useful. He made it 3 steps onto the sidewalk before the first camera flash went off. Mr. Torres. Franklin Torres. Rachel Kim rushed forward, microphone extended, her camera operator right behind her. Can you comment on the bribery scheme involving La Dora restaurant? Franklin froze, his face draining of color. I don't, what are you? Channel 7 News, another reporter materialized from his left, camera already rolling. We have evidence you've been paid by James Hartley to fabricate fraud allegations against Alessandro Moretti. Would you like to make a statement? No comment. Franklin tried to push past them, but a third journalist blocked his path, the blogger, phone camera recording everything. Is it true you've been stealing from customers for 8 months? We have footage of you altering bills and harassing staff members who questioned. Get away from me. Franklin shoved past the blogger, practically running toward the parking garage. Behind him, all 3 cameras captured his retreat in perfect high definition. In Alessandro's office, Mara watched the monitors with something between satisfaction and shock. How did they know so fast? Because we sent them everything an hour ago, Victor said, pulling up the email logs. When Franklin entered the building, an automated trigger sent comprehensive evidence packages to all 3 journalists. The footage of him dragging you, the falsified bills, the text messages with Hartley, financial records showing systematic theft. Everything. They've had time to review it all while Franklin was in the meeting, Michael added. Now they're getting his reaction on camera. Alessandro stood silent, watching Franklin's panicked flight across the monitors.
And in 3, 2,
1 inch. Rachel Kim's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her eyes widening, then turned to her camera operator. We're going live. Right now. Within minutes, the story broke across every Chicago news outlet. Breaking, restaurant manager caught in bribery scheme, paid to fabricate fraud evidence. The Tribune's website crashed from traffic within the first 10 minutes. Channel 7 interrupted their regular programming for a special report. The Financial Blog's article went viral on Twitter, shared thousands of times in the first hour. And the footage, the damning, unavoidable footage, played on every screen. Franklin dragging Mara toward the back hallway, his face twisted with rage. Franklin's fingers flying across the register, adding charges that didn't exist. Franklin counting money with Marcus behind the bar, splitting stolen cash. Franklin entering the Meridian Tower with a secure drive, then fleeing from reporters 47 minutes later. By 10 p.m., #LaDoro scandal was trending nationally. At Chicago Foodie, holy shit, just watch the footage from La Doro. That manager literally dragged a waitress for refusing to process a fake bill. This is insane. At Justice Watch, the bravery of that anonymous waitress though. She stood up to corruption, even though she knew it could cost her everything. That's integrity. At Cheetown News, breaking, James Hartley's Meridian development under investigation. Multiple properties allegedly acquired through intimidation and fraud. FBI involved. At Restaurant Insider, sources say the waitress who exposed the fraud at La Doro kept detailed records for months. She's a hero. Someone get this woman a medal. In her tiny Queens apartment, Mara sat on the couch with Tommy, both of them staring at her laptop screen in disbelief as the story spread like wildfire. That's you, Tommy breathed, watching the footage of his sister standing up to Franklin. Mara, that's actually you on national news. They blurred my face, Mara said, her voice shaky. The media had respected Alessandro's request to protect her identity, showing Franklin clearly but obscuring Mara's features. No one knows it's me. I know it's you. And you're amazing, Tommy hugged her fiercely. Mom and Dad would be so proud. Mara's phone buzzed. A text from Alessandro. Turn on Channel 7. Press conference in 5 minutes. They switched to the live feed just as James Hartley appeared on screen, flanked by lawyers, his silver hair perfect, but his eyes showing strain. These allegations are completely false, Hartley read from a prepared statement, his voice steady, but his hands gripping the podium too tightly. Meridian Development has always operated with complete integrity. The suggestion that we would engage in bribery or intimidation is not only incorrect but defamatory. Mr. Hartley, Rachel Kim's voice cut through. We have recordings of you discussing plans to fabricate evidence against Alessandro Moretti. How do you explain that? Hartley's composure cracked for just a moment. Those recordings, if they exist, are taken out of context. What about the $50,000 paid to Franklin Torres tonight? We have photographs of the exchange. No comment. This press conference is over. Hartley turned and walked away, his lawyers scrambling to keep up, cameras flashing like lightning strikes. The news anchor reappeared on screen. Breaking development in the Laudoro scandal. The FBI has just confirmed they're opening an investigation into James Hartley and Meridian Development, with allegations including bribery, conspiracy, and racketeering. Additionally, the Cook County State's attorney has issued an arrest warrant for Franklin Torres on charges of fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Mara's phone rang.
Alessandro.
"Are you watching?" he asked. "Everyone's watching," Mara replied, scrolling through social media where the story was exploding. "Alessandro, this is everywhere. National news, Twitter, even international outlets are picking it up."
Good.
"Sunshine is the best disinfectant." There was satisfaction in his voice. "How are you holding up?"
I
don't know. Overwhelmed? Relieved?" Mara watched another clip play, Franklin's panicked face as reporters surrounded him. "Is it always this fast? This public?" "Only when you want to make sure there's no way for rats to hide in the darkness." Alessandro paused. "Get some rest, Mara. Tomorrow we start rebuilding. But tonight, just let yourself feel what you're feeling. You earned this." After he hung up, Mara continued watching the news coverage spiral outward. Each channel added new details, new angles, new revelations. Hartley's stock portfolio tanking. Other victims coming forward from properties Meridian had acquired. Former Laudoro employees sharing their own stories of Franklin's harassment. At 11:43 p.m., Franklin Torres was arrested at a motel outside the city, trying to flee with the $50,000 in cash. The news helicopters captured footage of him being led away in handcuffs, and within minutes, that image was everywhere too. At Chicago Justice, Franklin Torres arrested. Tried to run with the bribe money. You can't make this stuff up. At Food Industry News, the Laudoro whistleblower just changed the entire Chicago restaurant scene. Every worker who's ever been silenced is watching this and feeling hope. At Ethics in Business, this is what happens when ordinary people refuse to be complicit in corruption. One waitress said no and brought down an empire of fraud. Mara closed her laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Franklin was in a cell. Hartley was watching his empire crumble. And she, a shy, scared waitress who just wanted to pay her brother's medical bills, had helped orchestrate all of it. Her phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number. "The staff at Laudoro wants to thank you. We're all coming back tomorrow. Sarah." Then another, "I never had the courage you did. Thank you for fighting back.
Lisa."
And another, "You saved us all. David." Mara sank onto the couch, tears streaming down her face as messages poured in from co-workers she'd barely known, customers who'd been defrauded, other restaurant workers who'd seen the news and felt inspired to speak up about their own experiences. Tommy put his arm around her shoulders. "You okay?" "Yeah," Mara said, wiping her eyes. "I really think I am." Outside, Chicago continued its endless rhythm. Cars honking, trains rumbling, people living their lives. But something had shifted. A small act of courage had rippled outward, touching thousands of lives, proving that sometimes standing up to power actually worked. And tomorrow, the real work of rebuilding would begin. Friday morning arrived with the relentless energy of a news cycle that wouldn't quit. Mara woke to 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and the sound of her phone buzzing continuously with notifications. The first headline she saw made her breath catch. Meridian Development stock crashes 47% in pre-market trading. She scrolled through the financial news with shaking hands. Hartley's empire was collapsing in real time. Investors were fleeing. Business partners were severing ties. 3 of Meridian's board members had resigned overnight. The company that had seemed untouchable 24 hours ago was now hemorrhaging money and credibility by the minute. At MarketWatch, Meridian Development in free fall lost $340 million in market cap overnight. Several pension funds demanding emergency meetings. At Business Insider, James Hartley's net worth dropped estimated $120 million since last night. More properties under investigation. This could be a total collapse. Tommy appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school, holding his phone. Have you seen this? They're calling it the biggest corruption scandal in Chicago restaurant history. Mara pulled up another article. The FBI had expanded their investigation to include 12 other properties Hartley had acquired over the past 5 years. Former employees were coming forward with stories of intimidation, falsified documents, and bribery. District attorneys in 3 different counties were reviewing cases. And at the center of it all was the footage of a small waitress saying, "That's theft, sir." "I need to get to La Doro," Mara said, checking the time.
9:47 Uhr morgens.
Alessandro had texted earlier asking her to come in at noon. When she arrived at the restaurant, she almost didn't recognize it. The street was packed with news vans, reporters, and photographers. A line of people wrapped around the block, customers wanting to support the restaurant that fought back, as the Tribune had dubbed it. Security guards Alessandro had hired overnight were managing the crowd. One of them, she recognized him from the surveillance office, spotted her, and spoke into his radio. "Miss Chun is here." Michael appeared within seconds, guiding her through a side entrance to avoid the media circus. "It's been like this since 6 a.m., he explained. "Every news outlet wants an interview. We've had 3 film crews trying to get inside. 2 publishing houses have already called offering book deals." "Book deals?" Mara's head spun. "For your story. The Waitress who took down a corrupt empire." Michael smiled slightly.
"You're a symbol now, Mara.
Whether you wanted to be or not. Inside, the restaurant was transformed. The staff was there, Sarah, Lisa, David, even servers Mara barely knew, all cleaning, reorganizing, preparing for what felt like a grand reopening rather than a regular Friday shift. When Mara walked in, they stopped. Everyone turned to look at her. Then Sarah started clapping. Within seconds, the entire staff joined in, applause that echoed through the empty dining room. Mara stood frozen, overwhelmed, as people she'd worked alongside in silence for months now looked at her with something like reverence. "You saved us," Sarah said, stepping forward with tears in her eyes. "All of us. We were all too scared to speak up, and you did it anyway." "I didn't do it alone," Mara managed. "But you started it." Lisa hugged her tightly. "You stood up when the rest of us stayed silent. That took real courage." Alessandro appeared from his office upstairs, descending the staircase with Michael at his side. The staff immediately straightened, conversation dying. "Status report," Alessandro said to Michael, his voice carrying that quiet authority. "Reservations are booked solid for the next 3 weeks," Michael replied. "We've had to add a waiting list. Social media engagement is up 4,000%. And the health inspector called, wants to do a full review to publicly certify we're operating with complete integrity." "Good. Schedule it for Monday." Full transparency. Alessandro's gaze swept the room, landing on each staff member. "I want to make something clear to all of you. What happened this week wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about rebuilding trust. Every single person in this room has a choice now: stay and be part of something better, or walk away with a month's severance and my recommendation." No one moved. "If you stay," Alessandro continued, "understand that La Doro operates differently now.
No tolerating harassment.
No looking the other way. No compromising integrity for profit. We do this right, or we don't do it at all." "We're staying," Sarah said, and a murmur of agreement rippled through the staff. Alessandro nodded once. "Then let's get to work." As the staff dispersed to their stations, Alessandro gestured for Mara to follow him upstairs. In his office, Victor had multiple screens showing the ongoing news coverage. "Franklin's lawyer just released a statement," Victor said, pulling up the document. "He's claiming coercion, saying Hartley threatened him into cooperation, trying to cut a deal with prosecutors. Will it work? Mara asked. No, Alessandro said flatly. We have 8 months of evidence showing Franklin initiated the theft long before Hartley got involved. The recordings from last night prove he was a willing participant. He'll serve time. On one of the screens, a reporter stood outside the Cook County Jail. Franklin Torres remains in custody on $500,000 bail, which his family cannot afford. Sources say he's cooperating with authorities, providing information about Hartley's broader operation in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's vanishing into the legal system, Michael observed. By the time this is over, he'll be just another statistic.
A conscionaritae.
Mara thought about Franklin's grip on her arm, his threats, his months of unchecked power. Now he was in a cell, his career destroyed, his reputation ruined, facing years in prison. She waited to feel satisfaction, but mostly she just felt tired. What about the others? She asked. Marcus, the bartender. The managers who looked the other way. Marcus cut a deal this morning, Victor said. Full cooperation in exchange for probation. He's singing like a canary about Hartley's other properties. Alessandro moved to the window overlooking the street where the crowd still gathered. The staff who were complicit but not criminal, they're gone. We let them resign quietly. The ones who are just scared, trying to survive, they're staying if they want to. And La Doro? Mara asked. Is about to become the most famous restaurant in Chicago, Alessandro turned back to her. Which is why we need to discuss your role going forward. My role. Michael pulled up a new organizational chart on one of the screens. At the top was Alessandro's name. Directly below it, a new position. Director of Operations, Mara Chin. You're offering me a promotion? Mara's voice came out barely above a whisper. I'm offering you a partnership, Alessandro corrected. You've proven you have integrity, intelligence, and courage. You know this business from the ground up, you understand what needs to change, and the staff trusts you. I need someone like that helping me rebuild. I don't have experience. You have something better. You have principles you're willing to fight for. Alessandro's expression was serious. This isn't charity, Mara. This is me recognizing talent when I see it. You can say no, go back to waitressing, and I'll respect that decision. Or you can help me turn La Doro into proof that doing the right thing is also good business. Mara looked at the screens showing the crowds, the headlines, the transformation already underway. She thought about her notebook full of careful observations, about standing up to Franklin, about every time she'd been powerless and afraid. When do I start? She asked. Alessandro's rare smile appeared. You already have. Outside, Chicago was buzzing with the scandal. Hartley's lawyers were in emergency meetings. Franklin was cutting deals from his cell. And the anonymous waitress, now revealed in internal circles as Mara Chin, was being offered a chance to rebuild not just a restaurant, but her entire future. The fallout was only beginning. But for the first time since her parents died, Mara felt like she was building something instead of just surviving. 1 week later, La Doro's main dining room was transformed into a press venue. Cameras lined the back wall, reporters filled every seat, and the murmur of anticipation buzzed through the crowd like electricity. Outside, more media trucks than Mara could count blocked the street. She stood backstage, or rather, in the kitchen, smoothing down her navy dress for the 100th time. Alessandro had bought it for her yesterday, insisting she needed something appropriate for what he kept calling the unveiling. She'd protested the expense until he'd simply had it delivered to her apartment. You ready? Michael appeared beside her, impeccable as always in a charcoal suit. No, Mara admitted. I've never done anything like this. Good. Nerves mean you care, he adjusted his cufflinks. Remember what Alessandro told you. Speak from the heart, keep it brief, and don't let them bully you into saying more than you wanted. Through the kitchen doors, Mara could hear the crowd settling. A week ago, she'd been an anonymous waitress. Now she was about to step onto a stage in front of national media to be introduced as the new director of operations of Chicago's most talked-about restaurant. 5 minutes, Victor said into his headset, coordinating the event with military precision. Alessandro emerged from his office, and Mara's breath caught. She'd seen him in expensive suits before, but today he wore power like a second skin. A black three-piece suit that probably cost more than her first car, his dark hair perfectly styled, his expression calm and unreadable. "How's the crowd?" he asked Michael.
Packed.
Tribune, Times, Wall Street Journal, every local outlet, and about a dozen food industry publications. "There's also a crew from 60 Minutes," Michael paused. "This is going to be big, boss." "That's the point," Alessandro turned to Mara. "You don't have to do this if you're uncomfortable. I can introduce the changes without putting you in the spotlight." Mara thought about her notebook, about Franklin's grip on her arm, about every time she'd been invisible and powerless.
No.
"I want to do this." Alessandro's eyes held hers for a long moment. "Then let's show them what integrity looks like." The lights dimmed. Victor gave the signal. Michael stepped out first, his voice carrying across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. For the past week, Chicago has been talking about Law Doro, about corruption exposed, justice served, and the courage of ordinary people standing up to power. Today, we're here to talk about what comes next. Please welcome the owner of Law Doro, Alessandro Moretti." The room erupted with camera flashes as Alessandro walked onto the small stage they'd constructed. He moved to the podium with that same predatory grace, waiting for the noise to settle before he spoke. "For 2 years," he began, his voice quiet but commanding absolute attention, "I've owned Law Doro through various corporate structures, operating behind the scenes while others managed day-to-day operations. I did this for privacy, for security, and because I believed delegation was strength." He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "I was wrong." The room went silent. When you distance yourself from the ground floor, you create space for corruption to grow. You allow small acts of cruelty to become systemic abuse. You make it possible for good people to suffer while bad people profit. Alessandro's hands gripped the podium. "That ends today. I'm stepping out of the shadows to take full, public responsibility for Law Doro, for what it was, what it became, and what it will be." Rachel Kim, sitting front row, raised her hand. "Mr. Moretti, there have been questions about your family's background, suggestions of organized crime connections. How do you respond to concerns that Law Doro might be a front for illegal operations?" Alessandro's smile was cold. "Let me be absolutely clear. Law Doro is a legitimate restaurant. Every permit is in order. Every tax is paid. Every employee is legal. And as of this morning, we've invited the FBI, the IRS, and the Chicago Health Department to conduct full audits. Complete transparency." Another reporter stood. "But your family—" "My family's history is complicated, and I won't apologize for where I come from. But I will say this, Law Doro represents what I'm building for the future. A business that operates in daylight, treats people with dignity, and proves that doing the right thing is also good business." He let that settle, then continued. "This past week, the story has focused on Franklin Torres and James Hartley, the villains who got caught. But that's not the real story. The real story is about a young woman who saw something wrong and refused to be complicit. A woman who documented months of abuse, knowing it might cost her everything. A woman who stood up to power when everyone else, including me, had failed to notice what was happening in my own restaurant." Alessandro turned slightly, extending his hand toward the kitchen. "Mara-chun, would you please join me?" Mara's legs felt like water as she walked through the kitchen doors. The camera flashes were blinding. The crowd was enormous. But Alessandro's steady presence beside her anchored her, kept her moving forward. She stepped onto the stage, and the room exploded with questions. "Ms. Chun, how long did you document the fraud? Were you scared when you confronted Franklin? What made you decide to speak up?" Alessandro raised a hand, and the room quieted instantly. That kind of power, Mara thought, couldn't be bought. "I want to read you something," Alessandro said, pulling a piece of paper from his jacket. "This is from Mara's notebook, dated 3 months ago," he read. "In case someone needs this someday. Someone brave enough to care." He looked at Mara. You were documenting evidence for someone else. Someone you hoped would have the courage you thought you lacked. But Mara, you were that someone. You were always that brave. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. Which is why, Alessandro continued, turning back to the crowd, effective immediately, Mara Chun is Laudoro's new director of operations. She'll be implementing comprehensive reforms, fair pay policies, anonymous reporting systems for harassment, transparency in billing, and regular staff training on ethics and integrity. She's 22 years old. She has more courage than most people twice her age, and she's going to help me prove that restaurants can be profitable without being predatory. The room erupted with more questions, but Alessandro spoke over them. I told Mara something yesterday, and I want to share it with all of you. Integrity doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the brave. And the bravest person in this room, in this whole story, is standing right here. He stepped back, giving Mara the podium. She looked out at the sea of faces, cameras, and recording devices. A week ago, this would have terrified her into silence. But she'd faced down Franklin, partnered with a man who moved in shadows, and helped bring down a corrupt empire. She could handle a press conference. My name is Mara Chun, she said, her voice steady. I'm 22 years old. I'm a college dropout working 3 jobs to pay my brother's medical bills. A week ago, I was nobody special. Just another waitress trying to survive. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But I'm also the daughter of immigrants who taught me that your character is defined by what you do when no one's watching. And I'm here to tell every worker, every server, every person who's ever been told to stay silent and look the other way, your voice matters. Your integrity matters. And if you stand up, even when you're scared, even when it feels impossible, sometimes the powerful actually listen. The room was dead silent. Laudoro is going to be different now, Mara continued. Not perfect, we're human, we'll make mistakes. But honest. Transparent. A place where doing the right thing isn't punished, it's rewarded. And if we can do it here, other restaurants can do it too. She looked at Alessandro, who nodded with something like pride in his eyes. Thank you, Mara said simply, and stepped back from the podium. The room erupted, questions, camera flashes, reporters shouting for follow-ups. But through it all, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. The new sign went up on a cold Monday morning, 2 weeks after the press conference. Workers on scissor lifts carefully removed the old Laudoro lettering, replacing it with something bolder, more deliberate. Laudoro built en trousse. Mara stood on the sidewalk with her coffee, watching the transformation. Around her, a small crowd had gathered, curious passers-by, loyal customers, a few reporters who seemed to permanently camp outside now. It's perfect, Sarah said, appearing beside her with her own coffee. Simple. Honest. It's terrifying, Mara admitted. What if we can't live up to it? Then we fail honestly, which is better than succeeding through lies, Sarah smiled. You taught us that. Inside the restaurant, the transformation was even more dramatic. Alessandro had closed Laudoro for 10 days, an eternity in the restaurant business, for what he called comprehensive restructuring. In reality, it was a complete overhaul of how the business operated. Mara had spent those 10 days in a whirlwind of activity that still made her head spin. She'd worked with HR consultants to develop new hiring practices. She'd partnered with a local law firm to create anonymous reporting systems for harassment. She'd restructured the pay scale to ensure servers earned living wages, even on slow nights. And today, they were reopening. Staff meeting in 5, Michael called from the doorway. Everyone in the main dining room. The team assembled, 32 employees, a mix of old staff who'd stayed and new hires who'd been meticulously vetted. Gone were Franklin's cronies, the managers who'd looked the other way, the bartenders who'd helped skim profits. In their place were people who'd survived background checks, reference verifications, and personal interviews with Mara herself. Alessandro stood at the front of the room, Mara beside him. She still wasn't used to this, being leadership, being visible, being someone people looked to for direction. Before we open these doors, Alessandro began, I want everyone to understand what L'Adoro represents now. This isn't just a restaurant. It's a statement. We're proving that integrity and profitability aren't mutually exclusive. He gestured to Mara. Our director of operations has implemented new policies that I want everyone to review. Mara stepped forward, tablet in hand, trying to channel the confidence she'd felt at the press conference. First, compensation. Everyone is now salaried with benefits, health insurance, paid sick leave, and retirement contributions. No more relying solely on tips to survive. Murmurs of approval rippled through the staff. Second, transparency. All bills are itemized and reviewed by 2 people before reaching customers. Any discrepancies get flagged immediately. We're also implementing a customer feedback system where they can report any concerns directly to management, anonymously if they prefer. Third, she continued, zero tolerance for harassment. We've partnered with an outside firm that handles all complaints confidentially. You report to them, not to us, which means no retaliation is possible. Every complaint will be investigated thoroughly. David, one of the servers who'd stayed, raised his hand. What about training? Some of us have only worked in less professional environments. Good question. Mara pulled up a schedule on her tablet. Every staff member goes through 40 hours of training, customer service, ethics, conflict resolution, and industry best practices. We're starting today, before the dinner shift. Over the next week, Mara watched the transformation take hold. The staff training sessions revealed both strengths and gaps. Sarah turned out to be a natural leader, taking newer servers under her wing. David had an eye for detail that made him perfect for quality control. Lisa, quiet and observant, became Mara's assistant, helping track metrics and identify improvement areas. But the real test came from the customers. On reopening night, reservations were completely booked. The crowd that gathered outside at 5 p.m. was a mix of loyal patrons, curious newcomers, and people who wanted to support the restaurant that fought back. Mara worked the floor alongside the servers, her new role be damned. She wanted to see firsthand how the changes played out in real time. Table 6 has a question about their bill, Sarah reported. They think we undercharge them for wine. In the old days, that would have been Franklin's opportunity. Now, it was a chance to prove their honesty. Mara reviewed the bill, found the error. A house wine charged instead of the premium bottle they'd actually received, and corrected it immediately, thanking the customers for their integrity. Most places would have just kept the error, the customer said, surprised. We're not most places, Mara replied. Word spread. That small moment of honesty got tweeted, posted on Instagram, mentioned in a food blogger's review. By the end of the week, L'Adoro's reputation had shifted from corruption exposed to gold standard for ethics. But while Mara focused on the visible transformation, Alessandro was handling the shadows. In his office late at night, he met with Michael and Victor, reviewing the final pieces of Hartley's dismantled empire. The FBI indicted 12 of Hartley's associates, Michael reported. Bribery, fraud, racketeering. They're using Franklin's testimony and our evidence to build a RICO case. Hartley himself? Alessandro asked. Facing 47 counts across 3 jurisdictions. His lawyers are negotiating a plea deal, but the prosecutors aren't budging. He's looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. Good, Alessandro pulled up financial records on his screen. What about his property holdings? Victor grinned. That's the beautiful part. Meridian Development is in bankruptcy. Their properties are being liquidated to pay legal fees and victim restitution. The building they tried to use against us? Just sold at auction. To whom? To a shell corporation owned by, Victor paused for dramatic effect, the Santos Family Trust.
Michael's family.
Alessandro's allies. The properties Hartley had acquired through corruption were now being redistributed to people who would use them legitimately. The Restaurant Row development he was planning? Victor continued. Cancelled. The city council members he had in his pocket? 3 resigned, 2 are under investigation. His entire network is collapsing. Alessandro leaned back in his chair, satisfied. And the other investors who are working with him? Scattered. Most are cutting deals to avoid prosecution. The ones who aren't will face the same fate as Hartley: public exposure, financial ruin, legal consequences. Michael closed his laptop. Boss, you didn't just beat Hartley. You dismantled his entire operation and sent a message to everyone else who might try something similar. That was the point. Alessandro stood, walking to the window where he could see the new sign glowing against the night sky. Corruption only works when it's hidden. Drag it into the light, and it dies. Below, Mara was locking up after a successful service, laughing with Sarah about something, looking more confident than she had 2 weeks ago. She'd grown into her role faster than Alessandro had expected, bringing both idealism and practicality to every decision. She's good at this, Michael observed, following Alessandro's gaze. She's better than good. She's changing the culture. Alessandro watched as Mara double-checked the locks, reviewed the night's receipts, made notes in a tablet, probably observations for tomorrow's improvements. In 3 months, other restaurants will be copying what we're doing. In 6 months, it'll be an industry trend. And it all started because one scared waitress refused to process a fraudulent bill. Think she knows how big this is going to get? Michael asked. Not yet, Alessandro smiled slightly. But she will. The following morning, Mara arrived to find 3 restaurant owners waiting to speak with her. They'd heard about Laudoro's transformation and wanted advice on implementing similar policies in their establishments. By the end of the week, that number had grown to 15. Within a month, built on truth, wasn't just Laudoro's tagline, it was becoming a movement. And Mara Chen, the shy waitress who just wanted to pay her brother's medical bills, was becoming the quiet force that changed an entire industry. 3 months after the reopening, Laudoro had become more than a restaurant. It was a case study taught in business schools, a rallying point for labor rights advocates, and proof that doing the right thing could be profitable. Mara stood in front of the Tuesday evening staff meeting, reviewing the week's numbers. Reservation wait times, 3 weeks out. Customer satisfaction scores, 97%. Employer retention, 100%. Revenue, up 42% from pre-scandal levels. The new training program starts next Monday, she told the assembled team. We're also implementing mentorship pairings, senior staff with newer hires. Sarah, you'll be working with Jennifer. David, you've got Marcus's replacement, Tony. She'd stopped being nervous around week 6. The staff respected her not because Alessandro had given her the title, but because she'd earned it, working double shifts when they were short-staffed, listening to concerns, making changes that actually improved their lives. Questions? Mara asked. Lisa raised her hand. Are the rumors true? About the Chicago Restaurant Association wanting you to speak at their annual conference. Mara smiled. They asked. I'm considering it. You should do it, Sarah said firmly. What you built here, what we all built, other people need to see it's possible. After the meeting dispersed, Mara stayed behind to review inventory reports. She was so focused she didn't notice Alessandro entering until he spoke. You're still here. She looked up, startled. I could say the same to you. It's almost midnight. I wanted to check on something. He gestured toward the private suite near the bar. The one with the mirrored wall where he'd watched that first confrontation with Franklin. Walk with me? Mara followed him to the suite, curious. She'd never actually been inside it. The room was reserved for VIP guests and private meetings. Alessandro unlocked the door and held it open. The suite was intimate, elegant, with plush seating and that distinctive one-way mirror overlooking the main dining room. But something was different. The mirror was gone. In its place was clear glass. You made it transparent, Mara said, approaching the window. I did. Alessandro stood beside her, both of them looking out at the empty restaurant below, tables set for tomorrow's service, soft lighting creating pools of gold on white linen. This room is where I watched you stand up to Franklin, where I saw everything but stayed hidden. I built this space to observe without being seen. He turned to face her. But you taught me that leadership isn't about watching from the shadows. It's about standing in the light alongside the people you're asking to be brave. Through the clear glass, Mara could see their reflection, Her in her simple black dress and cardigan, him in his perfectly tailored suit. Different worlds, different backgrounds, but standing as equals in this moment. "I have something for you," Alessandro said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. Mara opened it to find legal documents. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading, and when she did, her hands started shaking. "This is... You're giving me partnership stake in La Doro?" 20%, Alessandro confirmed. "Fully vested, with voting rights."
You've earned it, Mara.
"Everything we've built these past 3 months, the policies, the culture, the reputation, that's your vision as much as mine." "Alessandro, I can't accept." "You can and you will," his voice was gentle but firm. "Because in 6 months, I'm expanding to 3 more locations, and I need a partner I can trust completely. Someone who'll fight to keep them honest even when I'm not watching." Mara looked down at the documents, then back at him. "Why me? Really? You could have anyone." "Because when it mattered most, when you had every reason to stay silent, you didn't." Alessandro's expression was serious, sincere. "Because you understand that power without integrity is just tyranny. And because you're the bravest person I've ever met." "I was terrified that night." "I know. That's what made it brave." They stood in silence for a moment, looking out at the restaurant that had transformed both their lives. "Franklin got sentenced yesterday," Alessandro said quietly. 7 years, federal prison. Hartley got 15. It made the evening news. "I saw." Mara had watched the coverage with Tommy, both of them quiet as the judge had read the sentence. "Justice, served in daylight." Michael appeared in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt, boss," but he stopped, taking in the scene. "Actually, this can wait." "What is it?" Alessandro asked. Michael smiled slightly. "The mayor's office called. They want to present La Doro with the Chicago Business Ethics Award next month." He looked at Mara. "And they specifically requested that Ms. Chin accept it on behalf of the restaurant." After Michael left, Alessandro turned back to the window. Below, a janitor was cleaning the last tables, humming softly. Normal life, continuing in a place that had been rebuilt from truth instead of lies. "You turned exposure into empire," Michael had said once, and Alessandro had disagreed. Because the truth was simpler and more profound. A shy waitress had seen corruption and refused to accept it. She'd documented the truth when others looked away. She'd stood her ground when she had every reason to run. And in doing so, she'd shown Alessandro what real power looked like. Not control from the shadows, but courage in the light. "Thank you," Mara said softly, "for believing in me, for protecting me, for all of it." "No," Alessandro replied, looking at their reflection in the transparent glass. 2 people who'd started as strangers and become partners, equals in the fight for something better. "Thank you." Through the clear window, La Doro stretched out before them. Built on truth, sustained by integrity, proof that sometimes the smallest act of courage could change everything. And in the reflection, a mafia boss and a waitress stood side by side, neither in shadow nor in spotlight, but simply present. 2 people who'd learned that the real power wasn't in what you could hide, but in what you were brave enough to reveal. The restaurant would open tomorrow. The work would continue. The story would spread. But tonight, in the room where it all began, everything was transparent, honest, and exactly as it should be. The end.